Rishi Sunak this week expected gratitude as he toured the country to hand out £2 billion in cash to local governments. It was all part of the Tories' Levelling Up Fund. There were two problems with the scheme, though. First, the money was awarded disproportionately to Tory-held marginal seats, leading to allegations of cronyism. This graph from The Guardian shows how unevenly the money was distributed. The blue lines are Conservative seats and the grey ones are seats held by other parties. They're ranked from most deprived at the top to least deprived at the bottom, and you can see that in the most deprived areas, Tory-held seats took nearly £100 per capita, while all other seats only got about £25 per head. And that pattern holds across all economic bands except Band 8. Those are fairly affluent areas, presumably, I would imagine, ones that the Tories hope to take, because seats held by other parties suddenly came into a lot of money. And The Guardian's number crunching doesn't end there, with the paper saying this: Conservative marginal seats have received 1.5 times the amount of funding per person than all other constituencies under the £4 billion budget, £76 a head compared with £53 a head. Constituencies that won under the Conservative landslide in 2019, many of which will be vulnerable at the next general election, have been awarded almost twice as much per person as other seats. Those constituencies, which include red wall areas such as Burnley, Workington and Blythe Valley, have received £90 a head under the Levelling Up Fund, compared with an average of £53 a head in all other seats. The critical fact there being that if you look at seats which are equal on terms of the extent of poverty there, it seems to matter whether or not the Tories are really keen to win that seat in the next general election, right? There is a second problem. Their extra cash amounts to only a tiny proportion of what has been cut from local government budgets over the past 13 years. That was a point ex-City trader Gary Stevenson made well on Politics Live.
Is this going to transform people's lives in these areas?
Well, I mean, if I take £15 off you and then give you £2.80, is that going to transform your life? These guys, they've found £2.8 billion to give to local councils. In the last 3 years, they've given £700 billion to the rich.
I know you've made
50 times as much. Listen, is it levelling up if I give a poor person £2.80 and I give a rich person £250? No, sorry, £700, 250 times as much. Listen, this government has presided over the largest and fastest ever increase in inequality in the history of the country. And the most Orwellian thing you've ever heard, they call that levelling up.
Very well put. Now, in terms of the precise numbers, I think £2.1 billion from the Levelling Up Fund was announced yesterday. This is the second round of awards from the fund, which is worth £4.8 billion in total. Core funding to local government from central government fell by £15 billion in the decade from 2010. And what you also heard Gary Stevenson talk about there was the money which was printed by the government, especially during COVID-19 in the form of furlough and handouts to business, which, according to his analysis, which you can hear more of on his brilliant podcast with Aaron Bastani, all ended up flowing to the richest in society. Hence, we have greater inequality than we had before the pandemic. The distribution of the funds of this Levelling Up Fund has even pissed off some Tories. Andy Street is the Tory mayor of the West Midlands. He released this statement after the winning bids for Levelling Up funds were announced. Fundamentally, this episode is just another example as to why Whitehall's bidding and begging bowl culture is broken, and the sooner we can decentralise and move to proper fiscal devolution, the better. The centralised system of London civil servants making local decisions is flawed, and I cannot understand why the Levelling Up funding money was not devolved for local decision makers to decide on what's best for the areas. So he was pissed off that, unlike core funding to local governments before austerity, this money was all decided by Whitehall where it goes. So you had various local authorities putting together bids. They say, please, we want some of your money so that we can do up our town centre, or please, we want to do up XYZ, which we think would be worthwhile. And then some civil servants in Whitehall decide, oh, that project is valuable, we'll accept it. That project isn't, we'll reject it. That's actually how all this talk of cronyism came in, because you've got people in Whitehall deciding who gets the money and who doesn't. Mainly goes to Conservative marginal seats. Aaron, what do you make of this story, this Levelling Up Fund, and what did you make of Gary's intervention on Politics Live?
Well, Gary was typically excellent. I would advise people to go on to iPlayer. I won't say that very often to watch the whole thing. And of course, to after that, watch him on YouTube. I think that interview now has 400,000 views over that. A really, really strong interview. And that's for a reason. That's not me just saying that to be self-aggrandizing. It's really, really good. And I've had lots of good feedback on it. In terms of the cronyism, claim, I think that's secondary. I think it's kind of stupid. So, for instance, and I'm sure there's a kernel of truth to it, but I don't think it's the main story here. And I don't think it's audacious. People have said, well, the Southeast is getting twice as much money as Yorkshire. Well, the Southeast is a population of 9.1 million. Yorkshire has a population of 5 million. So per capita. And then, of course, they say, well, Yorkshire's getting no money, but Rishi Sunak's seat is getting so much money. Of course, Sunak's constituency is seeing less than 1% of overall spending of this 2.1 billion. Still significant sum, but to say that it's, somehow it's, pork barrel, I think is a bit of a stretch. The biggest project in terms of per capita spending is the one on the Shetland Islands that is not held by the Conservatives. So there are many inconsistencies with this claim that, it's just glaring cronyism and nepotism, and it's purely about the Tories trying to win the next election. Another huge project is in Cardiff, connecting Cardiff Bay with Cardiff Central Station. So, are we saying now a project in Wales is about the Conservatives trying to set up the next election? And yes, of course, far more money is going into Conservative seats, but if you break it down by councils, I believe, actually, it's Labour councils which are getting more of this money. So it kind of goes both ways. The Guardian's picked up on this thing. I mean, I just don't... Frankly, Michael, I think it's this puerile way of doing politics, which everything the Tories do is bad because it's cronyism and nepotistic and corrupt. I just don't think that's the main story here. I think the main story is, like you say, the sums involved aren't that big. There's 3 rounds of this. This is the second one. It's 2.1 billion. But this approach of having kind of like pop idol style applications to get money to do stuff in your local area is bad. We need to devolve decision making in this country, and local councils and communities should be sufficiently empowered to spend money as they see fit, rather than get out the begging bowl and have to do some tap dancing to some bureaucrat or some government minister in Whitehall. So the approach is wrong, I think. The money clearly is inadequate. We need far more money to regenerate places that are unfashionable and not talked about outside the M25 than just 2 billion. And that's just this round, but it's still not very much. And I think to me, that's far more important than the whole cronyism thing. And I'm sure somebody will clip this up and say, oh, Bastani, Conservative, he's letting them off. I just don't think that's the main issue here. I don't think that's the main issue. And when you see stories like, for instance, the 4 largest urban areas in Cornwall are going to be connected and it's going to cost something like 30, 40, 50 million pounds, you think, why hasn't that been done already? And the truth is, Michael, there is so much low-hanging fruit in this country with regards to infrastructure, which should have happened 10, 15 years ago. If you look at Crossrail, HS2, that should have been done in the early 2000s. I mean, the Spanish could do it with high-speed rail. We're really playing catch-up. And so it's good that places like, Dundee or bits of Cornwall or, Merthyr, Bangor, I think, was a big recipient of cash in Wales. It's great that places like this are getting funding for projects, but it should be far more money, and I think it should be done differently.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about the cronyism. Can we get up graphic 4 again, Fox? Just because I want to know your take on it, Aaron. I mean, I do think there are explanations of this which aren't cronyism. So this is the graphic I showed from The Guardian. So it's showing that in the most deprived 10% of seats, if you were a Conservative, if it was a Conservative seat, you were likely to have got about £100 per capita. If you were a non-Conservative seat, you were likely to have got only sort of £25 per capita. I mean, what would your explanation of that be, Aaron? Do you think that's just because poor Labour seats tend to be in a city which have better infrastructure anyway, and poor Conservative seats tend to be a bit more provincial?
I think that's partly it, Michael. I think, you'd say that the whole levelling up thing is about going beyond the major metropolitan areas, although there is some spending towards places in London and whatnot. Labour accumulates loads of seats in London, West Midlands, Northwest, Manchester, Liverpool, Northeast. Despite all the things we hear in the media, there's still many Labour seats in the Northeast. So that's part of it. But also there are many, many Conservative seats, Michael, which were historically Labour seats. They swung in 2019, but they still have Labour councils, many of them. And so we're saying, well, these are all Conservative seats getting the funding. But believe me, in the local papers, those applications were being made by Labour councillors, and they'll be rejoicing that they've got the funding for those projects. If you look at, for instance, Portsmouth North, Penny Mordaunt is the MP there. Of course, she's a very prominent Conservative. No funding there. And then you get something in South Wales, Cardiff, like I say, connecting the bay with the central station. You get a huge amount of funding. And that will be a real bonus, a real push to local Labour politicians there. So, look, I'm not on top of all the detail. Maybe in 2 years' time or something, Pippa Crowra and The Guardian will uncover some story about nepotism and cronyism. I just don't think that's the main story here. And I think it's kind of people just stuck in a groove. We now do political reporting about the Conservatives, and we always use this frame. And I just don't think it's the main way of understanding the story and what's wrong with the political decisions being made.